So I've noticed that the YouTube psychedelic community has been starting to denounce psychedelics, at least advertising them as something beneficial. And I just want to weigh in on this topic and give my honest opinions of the pros and cons of what we're dealing with. And I guess the main question that this video I think is going to try to explore is taking psychedelics worth what is given versus what is possibly seen as a negative. So weighing the positives and the negatives. And I think I want to start by mentioning something that Jordan Peterson was talking about in one of his lectures. I think it was on like the biblical study stuff, but he was talking about how there's a standard deviation increase in openness with the use of psilocybin. And he also talked about its ability to make people quit smoking.
The next thing that another thing that Griffith reported was that 1 year after a single psilocybin dose, profound enough to induce a mystical experience, the trait openness of the participants had increased 1 standard deviation, which is a tremendous amount. And so it looked like 1 dose produced a permanent neurological and psychological transformation. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm not saying that, because I don't think that openness is an untroubled blessing. But it's certainly a testament to the unbelievable potency of the drugs. There's about a 10% chance, by the way, with psilocybin ingestion of a trip to hell. And so that's certainly something very much worth considering when you're thinking about the potential effects of this kind of experience.
So basically he said that, there's this huge increase in what's called openness. So that's sort of a personality trait that is tied to creative people. So the more open you are, the more magical thinking you have, and the more interest in certain ideas versus someone who is more closed off. They would be probably, more cynical and everything's black and white to them. They don't really want to look beyond and really fantasize about things. So he talked about it not always being a good thing, and I think that would mean if you were to take it too far on the spectrum of openness, because it could turn into something called pathological openness, and I've experienced things like that over my time. I've been sort of shifting back and forth between what I believe the psychedelic experience offers to us. Like, I believed before that it was something incredibly spiritual, and in other times I believed that it was something that was just mechanical inside of our brain. Right now, I can't honestly put any more real concern into those ideas, because I think it's just it's a question that doesn't really need to be answered for me anymore. I don't really think so. I don't really try to think about what it could possibly mean for the reality of the world we're in, or what exactly is happening with the psychedelic experience. I think it's healthier for me to just, if I'm going to experience it, just let it happen and not have any ideas about what it is and what it could be. So there was that video that YourMateTom put out, and he talked about his distaste for putting himself too much on the advocate of psychedelics, and I think he said that he oversold the benefits of it, and he wanted to backtrack all of this, and I perfectly understand all that. I think he deals with the idea that he's associated with psychedelics and only that, so there's a social stigma attached to it, and sometimes that could be something that's really hard to deal with. So I can perfectly see how someone would want to backtrack on, that kind of dedication to something like that. With me, I have different pursuits and different focuses that I don't have to feel that my whole identity is tied to the use of psychedelics. I mean, like I'm a pianist too, so that's something that I really identify with mostly as something that defines me. I'm not defined by my interest in psychedelics and altered states of consciousness. So I don't have that same kind of anxiety that he might feel, and I can see why he would want to distance himself from that. But his ideas about people becoming too much of a zealot towards the cause, I guess. I mean, yeah, people can get carried away with the idea of how helpful psychedelics can be to society, but that's more of a human error. I don't really think that that's an error. That's a problem with psychedelics itself. I think what we're mainly weighing here is what psychedelics give us. Is it worth madness and insanity? Because that's the real concern here. Because I was watching, I think it's called Adventures of the Mind. It's like a YouTube channel, and they had James Kent on, and he made I think it was, I don't know if it was a book or he wrote a book about like the dark side of psychedelics, and they had a podcast on with that, and he's basically talking about how it leads to megalomania and ideas that shamans can do whatever and can cure people and do magical things. And he said that it's all pretty much delusion, and people are poisoning themselves when they're taking these things. So I can definitely see what he's talking about from there, but the problem is that like I'm weighing what benefits happen to me. So my experience with psychedelics is that when I took them, it opened a whole another realm of like creativity that I didn't have before, and there was just an explosion of this new world that I was trying to recreate, because I was seeing these visions of these places and these realms that were incredibly complex and aesthetic. So when I was drawing these things, I felt almost like I was gifted. And when I was looking around with all of the all of the art that was coming out of the psychedelic experience, there's a whole visionary art movement with Alex Gray, Salvia Droid, Android Jones, Spectralize, Luke Brown. So there's definitely a lot of creation that's attributed to this, and that's, I think, the biggest thing that we would have to weigh on whether we should throw psychedelics in the trash and never talk about them again, or approach them with the right kind of respect and care and caution, because under the right circumstances they can be very beneficial towards the development of creativity as a whole. Like, a lot of advancement can come from these experiences in the right settings. Like if these were specifically for creative types or people in school, they could use what happens in the brain as something to aid them in whatever they're creating. Because on Secular Talk, he was talking about how LSD promotes this associative mind.
Medical Daily has a fascinating article here about the potential upsides of LSD. They say a study published in the journal Language, Cognition, and Neuroscience investigated how LSD can affect speech and language. 10 participants were asked to identify a sequence of pictures under the effect of LSD and a placebo 1 week apart. Results showed that while LSD does not affect reaction times, people under LSD made more mistakes that were similar in meaning to the pictures they saw. This means that when people saw a picture of a car when under the influence of LSD, they would incorrectly identify it as a bus or a train, suggesting that the drug may affect the mind's semantic networks. LSD triggered a strong activation of these networks, bringing to the mind more words that come under the same family of meaning. The effects of LSD on language can result in a cascade of associations that allow quicker access to faraway concepts stored in the mind. Inducing a hyper-associative state may have implications for the enhancement of creativity. All right, so this is really, really interesting, because think about it. If somebody's on LSD, you show them a picture of a car and they go, train. It's not an irrational response for people to go, oh, so LSD makes you stupid. It makes you an idiot. Like, you can't tell this is a car? You think it's a train? Like, what are you saying? That's ridiculous. So that's one reaction to it. But it turns out that that's probably the wrong reaction, because what's actually happening is, as scientists describe it, a hyper-associative state. And what that means is you have massively enhanced creativity. So when you look at the picture of the car, your brain is fucking firing on all cylinders, dude. Different fucking areas of your brain which would normally be working are working, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, you get this umbrella of terms that are not just car, but similar to car, and it's like, oh, that's similar to a train, that's similar to a bus, that's like a go-kart, that's like this, that's like that, and all these things are happening super quickly. And so you've opened up the door to untapped potential in word association and creativity.
And what I explain that to be as something that is making this is to that is to this connections in overdrive. So there's all of these metaphors and analogies that your brain is making that it's never made before, and all these connections. And when that happens, it's the perfect mind space for anything creative, like poetry or, writing stories, writing a book. I don't know what kind of influence that would have in technology, but for the art specifically, it's a game changer in terms of what it can do for the mind. So I think that is the only real benefit there, like the one that is worth focusing our intention on. And so I think that is the art and the creativity worth the pain of madness and psychosis and things like that.
What are your thoughts on using psychedelics to help people overcome traumatic experiences? Be careful, because psychedelics can cause traumatic experiences. Like, those things are no joke, man. I don't think we know enough about them yet to make useful generalizations about their hypothetical clinical utility. There's some decent studies indicating, with psilocybin, for example, that it might have utility in the treatment of depression. It looks like it's a really effective smoking cessation medication, which is really cool. But I think what happened was that when the psychedelics burst onto the scene in the 1960s, they terrified us so much that like we all recoiled at their very existence, and then decided not to exactly try to figure out what they were. And I can understand that, man, because those things are seriously weird. Like, they're incomprehensibly strange. I don't think we understand them at all. I don't think we understand them any more than we understand consciousness. I think that they may have great therapeutic utility, but they're viciously powerful medications and weapons, and so you use them at your own peril. Something too that Carl Jung said, which I really liked, because he talked about psychedelic use a little bit, although he was pretty old by the time the psychedelics burst on the scene. He said, beware of unearned wisdom. And I really like that, because even if the psychedelics can open the gates of perception and flood you momentarily with information of genuine cosmic significance, that doesn't mean that you're the sort of character. You're not the sort of vessel that can tolerate being filled with that kind of divine fluid. It might just break and crack you. So I would say, approach those things with trepidation. You should have the same attitude towards psychedelics that the ancient Israelites had towards the Ark of the Covenant, which was that, God was in there, but if you touched it accidentally, you would die. And that's pretty good. That's a pretty good general attitude to have with regards to any serious encounter with psychedelics. Those things require respect. They're not toys. They're not games. They're not fun. we don't understand what they are, but you know, they're worth treating with tremendous respect.
It's something that we have to come to terms with and sort of deal with, and sort of make the case on what is valuable about these experiences versus what is detrimental.